The northwestern state of Alaska remains one of America's most unsettled and unexplored regions. It is a place of wonder and mystery, but also of great danger, with roughly 2,500 people going missing there every year. And one settlement, situated far to the west of the state, remains the setting for some of the most bizarre of these disappearances, where people seemingly vanish without a trace. Timothy Smith had been in the process of making his first cup of coffee of the day when the mobile phone in his pocket had begun to vibrate. Stopping what he was doing to take the call, the state trooper found himself speaking with Tracy Bowie, one of the clerks from the nearby city courthouse. Initially apologizing for having called so early, knowing the officer would still be preparing for his shift, Bowie went on to ask Smith if he was aware of any missing persons reports having been filed over the weekend. Moving over to his computer terminal and checking the logs, he informed her that there wasn't any, his reply in turn leading to a protracted and awkward moment of silence. The clerk had gone on to relate that her colleague, Joseph Balderas, had not turned up for work that morning. The last she had heard, he had been going out hunting for the weekend and was now failing to answer his phone. Promising to look into the matter, Smith retrieved his coffee and went on to ask his colleagues if anyone had seen the missing clerk during their travels over the weekend. A popular and easygoing guy, well known around the town of Nome, it wasn't surprising when two local officers did recall having recently seen Balderas' car parked out near mile 44 on the Nome Council Highway. After clearing things with his superior and phoning Bowie with a quick update, Smith then grabbed hold of the keys to his cruiser and made his way out of town towards the location. Sure enough, as the marker post for mile 44 came into view, Smith could see a dark blue Dakota truck parked up on a nearby verge. Having checked the parked vehicle was secured and unattended, Smith had proceeded to remove the loudhailer from inside the cruiser and then call out for the missing man several times. All he received was silence, which seemed to grow more ominous with each passing second. Checking the Dakota once more, he saw no signs of damage and no obvious tracks leading away into the bushes alongside it. The state trooper considered the parked truck for a moment and began to feel a familiar tingling sensation as the hairs on the back of his neck bristled with unease. Shortly afterwards, at his insistence, additional units were soon on their way, in possession of thermal cameras and search dogs. But when the hounds had been walked up to the vehicle in order to catch its owner's scent, they had proceeded to track only a little further down the road, before coming to an abrupt halt. Despite several more attempts and the repeated urging of their handlers, the pair of tracker dogs instead remained sitting stubbornly on the spot where they had come to rest, in the middle of the highway, several yards from the abandoned vehicle, with no forward progress in any direction. It was as if the missing man had simply ceased to exist on that very spot. At the time of writing, it has been 6 years since Joseph Balderas set out alone to hunt game in the countryside around his hometown and never returned. The search for him would last 5 months, involving workers from numerous law enforcement agencies and emergency services, and costing tens of thousands of dollars. But no clue as to the fate of the missing hunter was ever uncovered, and 12 months later, he was declared legally dead by a local court. The Balderas case remains one of the most mystifying and frustrating missing persons cases in the history of the city of Nome. The 36-year-old was a fit and healthy outdoorsman who who held a position of responsibility within the local community and was part of a large circle of family and friends. Balderas had no known medical or mental health issues at the time of his disappearance, and was in the process of making plans to marry his fiancée and move across state to settle down in Juneau. Investigators have never been able to come up with a viable hypothesis as to why Balderas would disappear of his own volition, and they have met with little success in evolving a working proposal as to how he may have vanished in circumstances beyond his control. There was little evidence at the scene that he had ever left the immediate vicinity of his vehicle, with no tracks or damage found amongst the foliage nearby. The idea of an animal attack would be ruled out due to a lack of blood or torn clothing, and there was nothing to suggest that an accident or criminal act may have taken place. But perhaps the most concerning element in the disappearance of Joseph Balderas is that it's only one of many similar incidents, all within the same seemingly unassuming city. Nome was first settled at the beginning of the 20th century, when it was established that there were significant gold deposits lying hidden in the ground nearby. Countless adventurers and prospectors swarmed to the remote region in search of fortune, and as they did so, various businesses and services associated with their enterprises were also established. Over time, as the gold rush slowly waned, so too did investments in the city. But due to its isolated and remote location, it has remained an important transport and trade hub. It boasts 2 airports, along with a busy dock area, and it is via these facilities that most visitors enter or leave the city, as the roads leading into the countryside do not extend to any larger highways or settlements of significance. There have always been rumours of unexplained disappearances in and around Nome, mostly relating to members of the native population. But it was not until the late 1990s that the scale of these disappearances became clear, with up to 30 members of the town's population having vanished under mysterious circumstances. Every town or city inevitably has its own array of missing persons, and whilst 30 cases over 50 years may not sound of particular concern, the fact that Nome has a population of less than 4,000 pushes this number well above the national average. The families of those who had gone missing had campaigned for many years for external assistance with the investigations, stating that they did not feel the local police were doing enough to solve the disappearances. It was not until the summer of 2005 that they were finally successful in this endeavour, when the mother of Erica Pataki petitioned the state attorney in relation to her missing son. 21-year-old Eric hailed from an Inupiat settlement on nearby St. Lawrence Island and had been visiting Nome at the time of his disappearance. His family had repeatedly warned him not to travel to the city due to the many disappearances amongst their community which had occurred there, but he was adamant that no harm would come to him. When Eric's pregnant girlfriend informed the family that he had never arrived, a broad land and sea search was initiated for the missing man, which uncovered no clues as to his whereabouts. Upon reviewing the case, and those of the other missing persons associated with the city, the authorities duly handed ownership to the FBI, who went on to conduct a full review. Their report, in which they were asked to consider the presence of a killer or group of killers operating in the local community, found no apparent evidence of foul play. It instead noted the harsh weather conditions and flat open topography of the land surrounding the town. Alcohol was said to be a factor in most of the identified cases. The profilers found that many of the victims were male, had frequented local bars, or had been drinking to excess at the time they vanished, and had likely died of exposure having meandered out of the city and into the surrounding area. And yet this does not explain how the remains of the missing have never been found, given the lack of undulating terrain or thick undergrowth situated anywhere near the city limits. There is also little explanation as to how or why anyone would wander away from the relative safety of the community in such a vulnerable state. In any case, the disappearances in Nome have continued, with the most recent having occurred during the summer of 2020. A local woman named Florence Okpiluk had been camping out on the beach near the city. Many locals had encountered her during her stay, but on August the 31st, her tent was found unattended, with her jacket and shoes mysteriously folded neatly away inside. There was no damage to speak of. An extensive search was immediately undertaken, featuring the use of cadaver dogs and remote underwater vehicles to search the waters bordering the nearby beach. Alongside this, the local police conducted over 100 interviews with Okpiluk's friends and family, as well as those living near to the scene of her disappearance. In addition to her mobile phone data being handed to FBI profilers for further analysis, hundreds of hours of CCTV footage from nearby cameras were downloaded and analysed. Not one person was seen to have either entered or exited the city limits during the time Okpiluk was last sighted, and the only vehicle to be seen moving was quickly eliminated from the police inquiry. She was in a loving relationship at the time of her disappearance, with her parents and young child waiting for her to come home. The area around her tent was open flatland, with no sign she had passed through it. And had she drowned in the nearby waters, her body should have quickly washed back ashore, much closer to the town. As with Joseph Balderas, she remains an open and active missing persons case, for which the authorities are desperate for information. In 2009, the city became embroiled in a very public controversy with Universal Studios concerning a viral campaign which had been launched by the company relating to the Mila Jovovich film The Fourth Kind. The movie is set in Nome, and the plot ties the disappearances to wider UFO activity reported within the state of Alaska. A series of fictional abduction cases purporting to be genuine and to have originated in Nome were published online, causing anger and outrage amongst the families of those involved in the real-life incidents. After a swift climb down, the studio released a statement clarifying that the cases featured in their online campaign were purely fictional, and donated money to the local community by way of an apology. But as distracting as the argument with Universal Studios may have been, it did highlight the large number of UFO sightings in and around the region. Even with the confirmation that the stories published by the film studio were untrue, many believe that extraterrestrial visitors may well be the reason for the vanishings, citing the disappearance of two brothers from Wasilla as proof. On the 4th of June 1999, 15-year-old Michael Palmer was cycling home from a party with two other boys in Meadow Lake when he had begun to fall behind. Having stopped to wait for Palmer, his friends had eventually headed back to look for him, only to find no trace of their fellow cyclist. A daylight search located Michael's pedal cycle, lying discarded near the Little Susitna River. More concerning still, his trainers were then discovered lying in open ground, close to a nearby airstrip. 11 years later, in April of 2010, 30-year-old Chuck Palmer was part of a group riding their snowmobiles up to a cabin near the town of Talkeetna. Just as his younger brother had done before him, Chuck fell behind and became separated from the rest of his group, who then turned back to search for him, but were unsuccessful. Once the authorities had been alerted, an aerial search was carried out, and Chuck's snowmobile was found unattended in an open patch of snow. There was no trace of the vehicle's missing rider, but more worrying still, the particulate lying on the ground was completely pristine and undisturbed. There was nothing to suggest why the vehicle had come to rest where it was, or to indicate that Palmer had alighted and walked off in any direction away from it. It was as if the missing man had simply been plucked from his seat atop the snowmobile, which had then come to a rest of its own accord. In addition to allegations of alien abduction, there have been numerous other paranormal explanations put forward by commentators in relation to the known disappearances. Some have suggested that the region is a place prone to time and dimensional slips, similar to other areas such as the Bennington, Bridgewater, and Bermuda Triangles. These theoretical weaknesses in space and time are thought to have been responsible for the disappearance of a number of ships and aircraft which have historically vanished in the state. It has also been suggested that reclusive cryptids such as direwolves or Sasquatches may dwell in the isolated and unsettled regions surrounding the city, and it is these secretive predators which are responsible for the disappearances. However, it is perhaps more likely that the reason for a significant number of these incidents is far less supernatural, but equally as horrifying. In 1999, a local man by the name of Lancelot Imogen went missing whilst making a journey home from Savunga to Nome. In the aftermath of his vanishing, his sister came forward to claim that in the years prior, he had been brutally beaten by police officers on numerous occasions. Her allegations, and many others against the local police, were largely ignored, until a tragic and horrifying series of events which would take place in August of 2013. Investigators probing the murder of a 19-year-old student followed a trail of evidence which led to one of their own coming under suspicion, Officer Matthew Owens. When an attack, which Owens had tried to pass off as an ambush on him, was proven to be faked, he was arrested and later charged with the murder of the young woman. It would later transpire that Owens had used his position to abuse and intimidate numerous local women, leading to further accusations and allegations against other members of the police force. Whilst to the wider world the disappearances in Nome have become something of a cultural phenomenon, to the families of those involved, they remain painfully unsolved. With no obvious motive for their loved ones to have come to harm, and the topography of the area meaning that evidence of any apparent crime should be easy to locate, these disappearances remain both tragic and perplexing. It seems that even the advent of modern technology, such as CCTV cameras and mobile phones, has not been able to determine just who or what is stalking this city. Whether it is a serial killer yet to be apprehended, drunken misadventure, or something otherworldly, we can only hope that the truth will soon become known, and that the families of those who have been taken may find the answers they so desperately need.